Hey, Chris, welcome back.
Hey, what's up?
So when do you start Cal State San Bernardino?
Well, I applied for the fall semester, so right now I'm in the process because I'm 33, right? So when I was 18, I went to school and I just did crap. Like I failed all my classes. So I'm just waiting for the academic renewal so I can submit my full I can submit my application. But I want San Bernardino is the one that I want to go. But since I have a house in LA, so the worst case scenario is LA as well. Fullerton,
Cal State LA?
Yeah, Cal State LA. So I'm gonna apply for Cal State LA, Fullerton, San Bernardino, and Long Beach.
So San Bernardino has the cybersecurity program. In all the CSU. So and compared to the distance from here in Inland Empire, that's the closest for you.
Yeah.
I think LA has a certificate, but I'm not sure because from what I've read, based on the list that they gave me, is Cal State San Bernardino is the only one that's doing.
I think Fullerton has one too.
Yeah, but you gotta check to make sure that it's a certificate or a degree, because yeah. So make sure you verify that. I know one of the Cal Poly up in Central California, I think San Luis Obispo, also has and a lot of the times you can do distance education now. So
yeah, I miss face to face.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know. there's the aspect of the technical side where you can do a lot different hands-on activity with
Yeah.
the lab process, where Cloud Lab is only going to give you so much. But you know, after this year, I think we have to evaluate some of the tools, and there will be more development in tools, I'm sure, to expand that area.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know if you guys have seen, I posted the Activision cybersecurity internship. Let me share that with you real quick.
I did, but I thought it was just for the art or the gaming section.
No, they have all different areas. They just opened this recently. I probably spell Activision wrong there because they spell it with the without the E.
Yeah.
So if you look on the job post and they have the linking post, this one is mainly for the cybersecurity.
Okay. I'm
So
gonna apply.
if you think you qualify, because there's two different areas, they have the global one. So they just want you to have some Python, and if you have the other areas too. So because in a lot of the time when you do like game or web assessment, you have to know how to use JavaScript, and it's definitely an easy language to learn, very close to Python. There's different version of JavaScript though, just to let you know.
Yeah.
And then some PHP. Then you have to have basic knowledge, which most of you already have taken 27, 25, IT troubleshooting.
Yeah.
So this will be good for you if you, and they're looking to staff for May and June. And then when you look at this, the job, if you search them, they also have other like programming and graphic design jobs as well. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
And then just about 30 minutes ago, I added another announcement. The dean asked me to share this with you. So as if you live in Moreno Valley, you have an opportunity to earn $250 a month. And I've had students that gone through the Mobile Learns program, and you can earn up to a total of $2,000 a year. This is funded by the city. You just have to meet the requirement, which is fairly easy. All of you are in the CTE program, right? Anything technical is part of CTE. Cybersecurity is part of that. You have to enroll a minimum of 6 units. So if you've taken more than 2 classes, so both of you are in the Python and this class. And then if you have completed between 12 and 50 units, then and your GPA is over 2.0, you can click on the link to apply. And I think she mentioned that she has 16 spots still that's open. So if you want to apply for that, then you can qualify for a little bit of extra cash with your education. They have different programs like that. So
That's
check
cool.
this out. Yeah,
Yeah.
I put it in an announcement, and it's the latest one. So you can find this in the announcement. It's called Mobile Learns, and the application is very quick. So it's not extensive, so you can fill that out. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And I think most of you are in the other class, but I want to mention this because I'm going to post the video. They will send a survey for my evaluation, so check that out. And so you need to complete 2 separate ones for 2 separate classes. And your feedback is essential. We'd like that you share the feedback, and they will talk about that with me. So if you can take sometime this week between now and the 17th to complete the survey. The dean, I think she's going to be the one that's going to sit in this session, either in the future session or she'll watch the video. So that's what we're going to have for evaluation and survey. I think that's pretty much it for the announcement. So I guess I'll get started. We're 6 minutes in, and if we have other people will join us, then they will join us in a little while. Okay. So in this unit, it's really cool. We're going to talk about email analysis. I will link the lab and share that with you for Wednesday. So today we're going to talk about email analysis. We can find a lot of the information in email. Last week you did a lab for cloud, so you saw how that's done looking at Dropbox and OneDrive. This week we're going to look specifically with email forensic, because in some cases you will have to look at what type of email communication is exchanged. If things were deleted, where can you go and look for it? And there's so many different types of email now that the user can use. In some cases, it will be company's email, and we'll talk about the protocols that will tie with that. Okay, so in chapter 8, short chapter, it talks about email, how email works, and how you would look for digital evidence in email. So likely that we can find evidence on the local machine, okay? Because in most cases, the user would link their email accounts, whether it's webmail or corporate mail, to their system, smartphones, tablet, PC, laptop, you name it. Now, we can also retrieve email from email servers. And in the case of webmail, we have to ask for authorization to obtain the data, as it would be in a different jurisdiction. And in some cases that would relate to international law if the server is somewhere else in the world compared to United States, right? So we have to look at the regulation with that. But you will find some information on your local machine, on email servers, on the device that you use to access the email, like smartphones, tablet, PC, etc. And we can also retrieve information by looking at logs from your ISP or the user ISP, internet service provider, because in some cases they might use Verizon Mail, AT&T Mail, etc. And we would also see web traffic connecting to different email server if they're using web-based mail like Gmail, Live, Hotmail, Yahoo, etc. Okay. So in the first question of our assignment, it asks you, where can a digital investigator locate evidence relating to email, to an email investigation? We can look at it in the machine, in the local machine, in the system that the user has. And it might store or cache some of the email content and email information, and we'll look at those. We can also examine the server, the devices that are being used, smartphone, logs, or internet service provider. So now later on we'll talk about webmail, and we will talk about how we can go about asking for those type of information. Okay, you'll find this information on page 1 of your notes. Now, in many cases, as you know, we talked about why a lot of the lab activities are related to Windows system. It's because the majority of the business use Microsoft products. And Microsoft, the server that's used for mail in Microsoft is Microsoft Exchange. And that we can have storage that's linked, and now they use Azure to service that. And then you can also link SharePoint, so that way the user can have storage on the cloud, which is their server. Now with Office 365, the individual client system can use Microsoft Outlook, and Outlook would be accessed through outlook.com, which is the upgraded version of what we used to see in, based on live webmail. Before, you would have to log into the server to be able to pull your email. Now you would be using a web interface to connect to Microsoft Exchange server to be able to pull mail as a client. So the server itself is usually you would see that indicated when you do a scan, that will be an MX, and that would tie to the domain. So with, with Exchange, you have to set up your DNS and your Active Directory, so that way the user would authenticate and Active Directory is in charge of that. And then the user would be authenticating to the domain, part of that domain, so DNS. And all of those things would tie back into the Exchange. Now, when you log into your RCCD email, your student email, what they have is they have the RCCD domain and then the student email where it says student.rccd.edu. That's a subdomain of the main district system. So that would branch off. So you might have related servers, right, inside that hierarchy group, where that will be a child domain of the main one. And so that way you can still have different category of the user accessing the mail. So with this, we have to understand a little bit more about our protocols, because there are different protocols used for different type of mail services. So in the notes, it gives you, to begin with, is your SMTP. And when you learn this in networking classes or in security classes like CIS27, we touch on the protocol and why is it important in the security aspect. In forensic, we look at specific type of service with the protocol, because all of that information can be entailed in the artifacts that we're acquiring. And when you see RFC, RFC stands for request for comments. Originally, this was just a way to establish the standard and documenting the standard, but now we use this to really maintain specification and communication protocol, so it's standardized across the world. So if you're looking at how people using mail server and mail clients on, in Europe compared to here, right, you would see that the same protocols is being implemented for those type of system. So that way it would be widely used. So in SMTP, it stands for Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. And SMTP is used to send and receive mail messages from everywhere, any point in the internet. Now, if you're looking at SMTP, that's a protocol that's going to utilize TCP. And with transmission control protocol, it makes sure that there's acknowledgement, right? 3 ways acknowledgement before something data is transmitted. So it's using TCP port 25. And so from a monitoring standpoint, what we see is that when we're looking at the traffic coming in, that would show up with that protocol and that port number. So what we need is, what it does is it uses SMTP to be able to get the mail that's being sent from one system, one host, to the recipient across multiple networks. So now you would have different types of servers that would service that protocol, and it would reach the destination server by passing it through across different servers. Now, from the recipient end, this is the server end, it uses SMTP. So if you're looking at an enterprise level, let's say that we have, I use Bank of America a lot because it's common, right? Let's say we have Bank of America, and Bank of America is worldwide, right? they would have corporate, and their corporate office is in Texas. So their corporate office would have a set of servers, and those servers would connect to other servers across many of their branches and location in different states in different part of the world. And in such way that the servers would be able to pass, right, and transmit or transfer the emails that are communicated from different offices, from different location, from different users in their network. And we're just talking about email at this point. Okay, so their mail server would be interconnected, right, with their domains and also their authentication server, so that way it would create some kind of formal log when the user authenticated, who user it is, what domain that is sending the mail, and how that would get to the recipient. So from a forensic standpoint, SMTP is important because when we're evaluating server, we would see this protocol and we would see the in-between servers, right? The servers that would receive some of the email as it passed through the network. Okay. So to answer the next question, we would put down that the type of system used for SMTP would be your mail servers, and that would be port 25. And not necessarily have to be just Microsoft. There would be, you know, other like Linux-based mail server, you would see that too, but Microsoft is common. Mail Exchange is very common. So port 25 for simple mail transfer protocol. Now, moving away from the server system, we have to take a look at the type of protocol that's being used by the user. So if I'm accessing Moreno Valley College Mail, I'm using a different type of service. The server uses a different port and a different protocol to transfer the mail and make sure it gets to my mailbox. When I retrieve my email from my mailbox, and you occasionally see this when I'm on Zoom, right? Mail will be coming through, it would notify me, and I'm using Windows Mail on Windows 10, and it's linking to multiple accounts, my work account and my personal accounts. So on the client side would use POP3. Basically, it's POP version 3. Okay. And with this protocol, what it allows the user to do is to access the inbox, which stores the incoming mail, would be able to download the email. So therefore, we said earlier that the user local system would have some form of email information unless they deleted it, right? So POP is really designed to only receive mail. It's kind of like you go out to your mailbox and you open it up and you take out your mail that is put in there by the post office. So POP3 is only in charge of retrieving the received email. It doesn't, the system does not allow the user to send email. So this protocol also allows you to do offline writing of email, reading email, and replying. So what that does is it temporarily cache all of the inbox information. So even if you're not connected to the internet, you would have access to the last saved version of your inbox. Now you can draft it, but when you send it, you are now required to connect to the internet. So you have to get back online and be able to do that. But you can save to your mailbox your drafted version of the email offline. And once you get online, it would sync all of that with the server, right? Your system would sync with the server after you authenticate once you get online. then your draft will be updated to the server system, and then you can initiate the send there. But POP3 is designed to receive emails. So when you're looking at through the lens of the digital forensic, then you're only gonna see a copy, not the original, the copy from the client system. Now, if the user decided to delete all the copy on their local system, then you would have to go to the server to retrieve the original copy of the email. Unless they delete that from the server, then we have to revert to backup or the deleted area of that disk, which is the unallocated space, to be able to search for the index, like kind of like what we did with the cloud and all the other prior labs. So in the next question, it asks you, question number 3, what protocol is used to access email mailbox on the client system? What port number is used? So we would use POP3 to receive email, and that, excuse me, it uses port 110. Now, if the company uses the common port, and this is the common port, right? Unless they use uncommon port, and they would specify that. So that will be different in that case. So when we use a common port, we would know that POP3 uses port 110. Okay, so when you set up your school email account to link with your computer at home or your smartphones or on your tablet, so you can occasionally check email from me or from your other instructor and other resources, then you are actually using POP3 to receive the email. Okay, any question? No question. Missing a couple people. Okay, so transitioning from POP3, we're going to talk about IMAP. So in the world of networking, security, and IT, we have to remember these acronyms, right? All the protocols are in acronyms. And once you use it enough, you're going to be more familiarized with it, and you're going to start remembering it more. Okay. So this diagram shows you how it's like a visual diagram on how that's used. So on the recipient, we use the POP. Okay. And the SMTP is used by the servers.
I have one question. Is there any built-in protections with POP3?
Devin, say that again.
Is there any like built-in protections with POP3?
Yes. You said, is there any kind of what? I'm sorry.
Built-in protection.
As far as POP3, built-in protection, not necessarily. So it really depends. It comes back to the service provider or the company, right? So when you're using, and we'll talk about Gmail, when you're using Gmail or web-based mail, they offer the built-in protection with attachment scanning and such, right? With the companies, when you're using, like, let's say school email or work email, the company themselves have to implement, security scanning tool on that. So what they have to do to protect the email is to, number one, have some kind of anti-malware running on the server to scan. And this is why you would see them use semantic or some kind of anti-malware at enterprise level, where it would live detect all of that when the mail is coming through before it passes to the client. And even when the threat is passed, it also depends on the client system as well. So on the client system, you have to have the anti-malware. Now, if we're looking at phishing and other things, then it's really the responsibility of the user and also the service provider, right? Because on the server, what they can do is they can specify the rules. They can use some kind of prevention system or even firewall to filter all of that. But on the user end, it might pass through all the servers. And this is what you see with ransomware in school district and in hospital and in different facility, is that sometimes that still passes through because it's such a new malware that they can't detect it by signature or behavior, and the user would click on it. Now on the user end, if they have some kind of anti-malware tool to scan, it might detect that or it might not, right? Because we said that there's only about 60% of known threats that's really defined. There's a lot of unknown threats that's not recognized. So what you see is that sometimes that will go undetected, and if the user is not educated, they would click on it. So there's not 100% protection whatsoever. And with the protocol, to answer back to your question, no. Its job is just to get your mail to your box, and that's it. Okay. And with the IMAP is used to get your complete mailbox management with multiple clients. So I can have email messages from different servers, right? Like I mentioned to you guys, I'm using Windows 10 mail in my mailbox, and I would link multiple accounts to that. So I would be able to have different account connecting. So the true difference between IMAP and POP is that POP retrieves the content of the mailbox, and IMAP is allowing you to remotely accessing the mailbox, everything. Okay, so you are remotely accessing the account itself. Like if you were part of the company, or if you're connecting to so your Gmail and all the mails. Okay, so IMAP allows you to manage your email. And so with that, it store a database file of the client. Okay, so on the local system, it stored that database information. Okay, so to answer the next question here, we want to reiterate that POP retrieves the content of the mailbox, which is what was sent to you. And IMAP is allowing us to have the more of the full management, remote access management of our mailbox. Okay, and there are different versions of IMAP as RFC would manage these versions. So what you see now is when you, let's say you have a brand new computer, you just install the operating system, or you have that installed already, and you click on the mail application, and then the first thing it's going to do is going to ask you, what is your user account, so it can locate the domain, right? And then after that, if they specify the server information, then it will be able to connect. If not, right, then you have to manually input the server information. Then that will be the SMTP. But with that, we are using, if you're using both, regular corporate mail and also your web email, you're using both protocols. Okay, any question? So for protection, what we should do from a user standpoint is that we need to scan, right? You can set up your anti-malware, and you can use the free ones, that's fine, to scan attachment and things. And then with webmail, I know Google implements it, Microsoft implements it, so you can you can establish the control by setting up the rules as well. What would be considered as junk, what would be considered as block. You can block specific things on your webmail. So here it gives you the steps on how that's being passed using IMAP. So the copy of the mail stays on the server until the user goes in and delete it. Okay. Now they have to log in to that account in order to delete it on the actual server. But if they delete it on their device, it doesn't necessarily mean that the server won't get deleted. Okay. So that's the true difference. So in the forensic perspective, we can always go back to the server unless they delete it. Okay, then we have to get the logs. Any question? So the next question it asks you, in web-based email, what happens when the user deletes the email? Like we just mentioned, right? The email typically remain on the server until the system deletes them. And in many cases, they have a fail proof, meaning that they would have a trash can or some kind of container. So even if the user deletes it, it puts it in there in case they want to recover it, right? Now, if the user goes into the deleted folder and empty that, then it becomes permanently deleted. But it doesn't mean that we can't go back to the server backup and be able to do that. So if the user deletes it this morning, we can actually go to the backup file from yesterday or the prior days and be able to pull. We might not get the complete, all the emails that happen to arrive in the morning and gets deleted, but we will be able to recover most. Okay. So the server is the point where we would be able to obtain a lot of the information from the email if we're unable to get it from the user system. So in the web-based email, what am I referring to? Your Yahoo Mail, right? Some people are still using AOL, which is now owned by, well, it went to Time Warner and now Spectrum took that over. And then you have Gmail, you have Outlook, or originally there are still Hotmail account, right? And then you still got live.com, which also is owned by Microsoft. And live.com was more popular in the Windows Vista and Windows 7 era. So up until Windows 10, they discontinued live.com and they convert everything over to outlook.com. So when you have your school email, it's linked to, of course, Microsoft Outlook. And that would be outlook.com that you authenticate to. Then at that point, when you authenticate to outlook.com, right, that will connect you to the school email server and from a client access. So with this, since you're connecting to the web email, you're using the internet, you're using your browser. So a lot of this, we can go back to web browser history, just like what we looked at in all the prior weeks in the lab. You can find a lot of the details in web browser. And also you can obtain information from internet service provider. And you have to know that they only retain records for up to at most 5 years. So between 1 to 3 years. And with the jurisdiction, you have to obtain court order in order to obtain that. Okay. Question. Okay, so let's look further into the webmail because that's a very common type of email that most people use now. Like I mentioned, when the user accessing email on the web, they would have different folders. And when they delete an email, it doesn't completely go away. It gets put in trash or deleted folder. And then if they go and empty the deleted folder, then that will be removed from that account. But we can still find some archive mail or backup mail. Okay. So let's look at specific email. So all email would have some kind of to and from that's going to tell you about the sender and the recipient. Likely it would have subject and content. Sometimes even if the subject line is blank, it still exists, that field. So we can use what's called the email header to look at specific information about the email. So this is a screen capture, okay, from a Gmail. And the author, he basically opened up a file that pertains to the Gmail account, and we'll talk about the path of that, where that's located in your system. Okay, so we would see who is it delivered to, like the recipient information and all the in-between. So with this, what you get is, number one, you get the message ID. Okay, and that message ID is important because it gives you the timestamp. It tells you when that mailbox receives that mail. And the message ID also tells you all the in-between servers, right? The server information that gets passed. Okay. So this message ID is essential to us. And each of the ID is unique to each of the email. Unless it's altered, there's no matching ID. So your message ID is unique for each of the email, unless the user purposely go in and modify that. Okay, so now in some case, they say that if the email server is not compliant with standard, you might have a matching ID, or if the user altered the email, then it would have a matching ID. But the way it's designed is for us to be able to track, and for the server itself to use that ID to see, right, that is a different email than the previous or the next. So to our question here, we ask, what's the purpose of message ID in web-based email messages? Why is it important in digital investigation? What type of information can you obtain from the message ID? It is a unique identification for every email that's been sent. Like we said, there should not be a reason why it's matching unless it's been altered or not compliant. So it should tell us that there's no other email that is the same unless they modified it. What can we get from that? We can get the date and the time that the email was created on that server, and also server information. Okay, so any server that has received that mail would be able to, it shows that in the email header in message ID. Any question with number 6? So when you do your lab this week, you're gonna touch on email, and you would explore further on how that would look like. Okay. So here it gives us this number, and this number tells us about the time. Okay. So this is how when you access like your Gmail or your Hotmail, it would tell you when that email was received, right? At specific time and date. And it uses the ID to find that, to correlate that. So here, all that indicates is that it gives you the date. So 2008 is your year. The 07 is your month, right? And then this is your day. And then the rest of these digits are the hours and the minutes and the seconds. Okay. We also see from this, you saw that it has, right, from, so the sender information. Here is the timestamp. And then here you have the domain information. So taking this timestamp, it gives you the date. Okay. And then we'll talk about return path and receive. So what you see here is the email header. So when we look at the receive portion of the header, we would see this. We would see that there is information about the mail path, right? That means that which server it's coming from. Also the user ID information. So the domain is dreamhostps.com. The subscriber ID is this. And that's important for our reporting. And postfix, it tells you that it is a type of email server. It's open source. So instead of using Microsoft Exchange, which you buy license for, companies or organization would use open source product like Postfix to transfer email. So think of it like that would be the product equivalent to our post office physically, right? And so we can use this for commercialize or just to maintain records of the mail. So in the receive line, what you see there is also, you see IP addresses. Okay, that will be the servers. And so you get server information, address. Remember we talked about the subdomain or the child domain, so that gets passed through as well. Okay. So you get server name, IP. Now return path specifically is used for undeliverable messages, meaning that it could be the wrong address, right? Or a disabled account. So in the case that when it's used, it's going to overwrite the from field. So that way it reverts back to the sender. So in the email header, you also see the return path. Now, like earlier, Devin had a question, is that the protocol doesn't give us protection. We know that the service provider, many of these service providers have their own tools to be implemented for malware scan. So within that, you can also get some information about what kind of spam scan and virus scan that's being implemented with the server. Okay. So what we can see is that we can see that it would give us IP address information, and in this case, it gives you the IP version 4 address. So there are two types of addresses. We know that there's a public address, which is what the world see, and then there's a private address, which is what is used for the local area network inside the company. Okay. So if you see the private address, we cannot identify the provider. Then you have to look. And the private addresses, you would see them in these ranges. So class A, class B, class C, right? So you would see them like this. Any question?
Yeah, the addresses you showed, were those public or private?
So the address that's shown right here, yeah, that's often you see with the private address, and that would pertain to their internal network.
Oh, okay. Because I've been doing an IP scheme at work, and we're using like the 10 dot for a private scheme stuff.
Yeah, so the 10 dot is often used for private in a larger network because that's a class A, and class A gives you a lot more addresses, especially for client systems. So when you're looking at school districts, yes, class A would be used because it, you know, it just that you have so many students and so many faculty that you have thousands more compared to the other classes. Okay, so the way in the version 4 address, if you take networking, right, they talk about this, is that either you have more networks and less hosts, meaning less client systems or less connected system within, or you would have more clients and less network. So in the school district, if you have more users, you would want more hosts and less networks, because in most cases we can divide it up to maybe superintendent office, right, faculty versus student, and those are the subnetwork within a school district. It will be like that. Okay, so you tend to see more class A being used for that type of environment. The 10 dot.
I have a question. So when you're using the 10 dot, so that has a bigger subnet mask than like the tier B, C, or D?
Yes.
Okay.
So yeah, so all that is just saying that you have more clients and less networks, right? Because you have more system connected in each network, and you would have less number of the networks within that class compared to the other ones where you have less hosts but more networks. So I can have many more little networks. So in the case where if you have companies that would require separation in internal network, then you would use the other class. And the way we subnet is just to maximize, you know, the same address range so you can have more clients, you know, using a certain type of address. But if you move away from version 4, you don't have to worry about that. You can use strictly version 6 and with the 128-bit. And the automation with subnetting with version 6 is better too, that you would have more hosts and more networks in general. right?
So
So
if you're gonna run IP version 6, do you need to change anything different with your like computer network, like with your network, version IP version 4 to IP version 6?
on the OS level, you just have to enable the configuration for version 6, and all operating system has like that capability now with the latest updates, because everybody's using version 6 since 2000. Well, at the beginning, which is 2011, is when we completely ran out of version 4. So there was still company, there's still company now that's using version 4, but if you strictly just want to use version 6, you disable the version 6. Sidetrack real quick, since Devin, this is important because you also should know this from a forensic standpoint. So here's control panel, right? In Windows environment, we simply would go into our network sharing center and control panel, and then you would click your adapter, and I'm on a Wi-Fi strictly, right? You would go into the properties. This is where you can control how the addresses would be allocated. So I'm using 4 and 6, but in the case where you administer system and you don't want version 4, you simply uncheck this. And then on the version 6, right, if it's obtaining from the domain, the dynamic host control protocol server, you can simply select this, and you would configure the DHCP server to distribute only version 6. All right.
I have
Networking
one
is, yes.
last question, sir.
Go
So,
ahead, no problem.
the DNS will work at IP version 6 or IP version 4 without changing the protocol, right?
Right.
DHCP, you need to set to work for IP version 4 to IP version 6.
So the DHCP job is to lease the addresses to other system, right? Basically, it distribute addresses to the rest of the systems. So
yeah,
you can have
if they're distributing the addresses to the internal system, are all of the transmissions going out with a different IP address, like an external IP address? Then?
no. So the router would have, depending on how large or small that network would be. And so let's say that at your work, which is the school, you would have all of these clients connecting internally with the private address in class A. And when they send out requests, let's say they visit websites, right? Like a web server, what that will do is when you do a trace route on that, you would see that it funnels that through your gateway. And the default gateway would take that and transfer it to the next network, which is the internet service provider for the school. At that point, you would use a public IP. So everybody is internally coming through, likely that they would use one or at most 2 public IP. Okay, at home, you only have 1 public IP for your router, your Wi-Fi modem. Now, if you have a smartphone, the smartphone, since you have other service provider, right, like Verizon, AT&T, with that device has a different public IP. But when you connect that device to your home network, right, using your router to route out to the internet, you're using your router public IP.
Yeah, I don't know why I forgot about the router. I completely forgot about that.
That's okay. Sometimes it's just need, and so we think about the logic in that, right? Now, tying back to this, what can that tell us? Well, if you can see the local area network of that server, right, you would be able to pinpoint which server it is, because they could have many exchange server in the scale of millions. And like in the case of Facebook, right, if you're looking at the way we message and communicate and send information, they would have lots and lots of server to accommodate communication channel, to accommodate, to store, to do all of this. So to really pinpoint that, we can come back to that domain and say which one is in charge of passing this mail, or which one is in charge of specific service on the network level. Yeah, so anytime that it leaves the network, it needs to go through the router, and that router would interface network to network. So for our question, what type of information can we obtain from the receive lines of the email header? Domain name, for one thing, we saw that. The user ID, depending on the actual mail server for the web, of course. Okay, so the way they look at it is the Google Mail, the Gmail. So you saw the user ID in numerical value. You saw server names or transfer agents. You saw IP addresses of the server. Okay. And with the server information, we also see what type of mail server that is, right? We saw that it is postfix versus sometimes it will say MX, which is Microsoft Exchange. Okay. So, and there are, numerous products, of course, but we would look at some of the common ones because that's what you would see out there. Now in the return path, we see virus scan information, the type of virus scan that they use, spam scans, and additional information about the server. So that is part of the return path. And the return path is for undeliverable mail, right? It would overwrite the from. So in the case where it can't reach the destination, that's the path that it's going to use to send it back to the sender, saying that it's not reachable.
Okay, so if you run a trace route, is that... Never mind. I canceled that question. We're good.
Okay. Yeah, anytime. Just ask question. Trace route would allow you to follow the hops from your system to the router and then the next router until it gets to the destination. Now in Windows, it doesn't show you all the hops. It will show you about 13 to 15 hops. And in most cases, we travel over 30 hops to get it to the web. So just to let you know that it doesn't give you everything. It'll give you the majority. And some hop won't send confirmation back, so you won't get. So if it says timeout, it just pass it to the next one. So you might get a bunch of timeout if they block it. Okay. All right. Other questions? Okay, so here's the return path, which is different than receive lines. So you would get more information about the server in the return path. You get virus, spam, block, and additional information about the server itself. Then if you want specific details like address and stuff, look at receive lines in the email header. Okay. All right. Next, we're going to talk about email attachment. So the way that we send attachment is we would use MIME, and that's multi-purpose internet mail extensions. Now, the version of MIME is important because in the older version, there was some limitation. Okay. So now the way that we standardize this is that it allows our mail to accept ASCII, binary attachments, message body. In some cases, you want to have like web banner or advertisement in the email. Sometimes you would see that they would format it with different message body there and non-ASCII based header information. Okay. So with MIME, we would use 7-bit coding that converts binary data into ASCII text so people could see. Now, in the case where if you're sending image, right, attaching the image, it would store that as ASCII text in different segment. And then on the header, it would track it based on part values. So it would say, you know, various parts. Sorry about my dog. Okay, they stopped barking now. All right. So with the email attachment, we want to define MIME. So MIME is a standard that allows email to accept text other than ASCII, binary attachments, multi-part message bodies, and non-ASCII based header information. And so that way we can maximize our email capability by attaching pictures, by formatting our message to have, you know, different content. It provides information about your attachment content, the encoding, the data type of each of the segment, especially when you're having a large attachment, such as image. Any question? Not that only we have to know this for forensic, right? When you test for Microsoft or Network Plus, Security Plus, you have to know all your protocols, or even A Plus, you have to know some of the protocols. Okay, so understanding this is important for us because in forensic, we have to know what is used. So that way, when we look at it, we know exactly what that information contains. And you can find MIME information on page 5 of your notes. Okay, so that takes care of the attachment. So we learned so far that POP3 is for client to receive mail. Imap is for remote access of the email account. The SMTP is for server to transport mail. And MIME is for attachment. Okay. Okay. So we know that since many users are using Microsoft product, or their companies are using Microsoft products, they would have Outlook or Outlook Express. Okay. Thunderbird is used for Mozilla. So in the case where you're using maybe a Chromebook or Linux-based system, you can use Thunderbird to link your mail or access your mail. So I'm going to switch over to notes and I'll come back to that question. So since the people are using the Outlook, Outlook Express, and Thunderbird, what we can do is when you conduct email examination, you should export the container that's used by the client and open it up with the same type of email client. Meaning that if the user is using Microsoft Outlook, we would pull the content for that container, which is really their inbox and all of that information, and then open up Outlook on our system and examine the content. Okay. Another way that we can do this is we would use a forensic software. And remember, it's a copy of the image, right? So we would use a forensic software that's for email examination. So Xways is one of the tool, right? You've been using OS Forensic to look at some of the stuff, and it does have some of the resources for web and also email. Paladin is also another suite that's able to evaluate email. Now for email, webmail forensic, I pull up this. So Extractor is good for email, and that allows you to analyze multiple formats. So when you're looking at Linux and Mac system, Extractor is a good tool to use for that. Then we also have other commercialized product like Advic and SysTool Mail Pro. So they have many companies that produce different type. And then we'll talk about Mbox, because Mbox ties to Thunderbird, and Thunderbird is Linux based or Mozilla based. So if you want to convert things to PDF, they also have Advic Mbox. So these are some of the newer tools that you see, and you probably heard about Extractor already. And not that we can only look at email data, their Outlook or their box would tie to calendar and other things, contact information and such. So some of these tools allow us to evaluate that. Okay. So when we're using Outlook, Outlook uses these type of file: OST, PST, and MDB. And you would be able to find this on the hard disk. It's under App Data Local Microsoft Outlook. OST is used for offline, so that way they can still utilize their inbox when they're not connected to the internet. And when it's stored, it's the same path as the PST. MDB is going to be the file that's going to be for the server. So it downloads that file to the system. And then when the system sync, it's going to update that file on the server. Okay. Now for the offline file and the PST, you don't need to log in to look at that. And sometime you would have to go into the unallocated area to look at that because it's fragmented. Okay. So the path for the Microsoft Outlook would be here. So in our questions, it asks you, when you conduct an client email investigation, what type of tool should you use? So we should use the same client tool that the user use. So first we can export the container used by the client and open it using the same email client that was installed or used by the user, such as Outlook, Express, Thunderbird. Or we can use a commercialized forensic software tool, right? Like we looked at the suite in the past for all the other areas. X-Way, Paladin, etc. So we can use commercialized forensic software to examine the emails. And some would have better features than other. So one of the class that I plan to teach in the upcoming semester is CIS40D, I believe. It's a system administration. And in that class, that would be Exchange configuration along with SharePoint and some cloud-based feature with server, and then tying that also to the Linux side as well is to configure different type of system for networking on the Linux side along with the Windows. Okay. And here's the path for number 11, where you can locate your Microsoft Outlook or Express files. And here when we say users, right, that would be whoever the user would be. If it's Jeannie, like what he'd been looking at. So, and then under that user folder, you would see app data, local, Microsoft Outlook. And if you're using Outlook on your Windows system, you can check it out and see if you can find it. Okay. Okay. So now let's talk about some of the legacy file for Windows. So live email was used in Windows 7 and it was discontinued for Windows 10. So from Vista to Windows 7, approximately 7 to 10 years, we saw that Microsoft implemented live mail, which is live.com. And live mail uses the EML file. So the path for live mail is located on page 5. Similarly, you would see this. So instead of going to Outlook, we would go to Windows Live Mail. Okay. So within the content in the EML file for the live mail folder, once you get there, when you open up the EML file to evaluate, what we would see is we would see the inbox size. And in some cases, there will be calendar, log files, email account here. It shows that this person have new 10 email. It tells you the type of email that is linked with the live mail, which is Hotmail. Your inbox, different directory inside that email inbox. Okay. So we know that we can find in the Windows Live Mail directory under Microsoft Local App Data under the users folder. And we would find email address for the user, mailbox size and mailbox information, including all the subdirectory under that mailbox. Okay, even junk and deleted, etc. Any question? So this just gives you the picture of that, right? And so that way you can see what sort of information you can get from EML file. So different than Outlook Express, this is a type of file for Windows Live email. And in Outlook Express, you would use the OST or the PST file. Okay.
I have a question. Are you going to use the same type files if you're using a Linux operating system?
No, because in the Linux, that's going to be our next part. So Linux uses different file for mail. And when you use something like Thunderbird, it's an application to interface with your mail servers. It would use an mbox file. So when you're looking at Mac and Linux, that's a slightly different than Windows. Now, when you have Linux system that you're loading some of the cross application, like using Office 365, etc., if you can install that or using it through the web, then yes, you do get some of the same type of file, but located in a different directory.
So is Linux going to use the POP3 and all that protocol as well too, or no? Yeah? Okay.
Yes. Yeah, protocol stays the same across, but just how different OSs store the files in different location. Okay. Now, if you're using Outlook, let's say through a browser on a Linux system, right, you're still going to be able to retrieve the mail and it's still going to download, right, Outlook-based mail information. But if you're using Mozilla Thunderbird for that, then that would be, okay. We have flexibility now and we have ways to work around some of the OS specific type of file, right? And now Microsoft has to support the cross use that's browser based.
I just feel like when I use a platform like Git Bash to go through Windows file set, it doesn't give like the full allocation of like the Windows file set. So
right, because the way it's designed is for specific architecture and for certain platform, which is their OS. So yes, you're not gonna get the whole, just like how if let's say if you're using Office 365 on Mac OS, it's slightly different than using Office 365 on Windows system, like Windows 10. Yeah, some of the features will not be there because it's just that developers are unable to implement some of the things and it's slightly different. So yeah, because when you come back to the architecture, it's really to the chip, right, to the processor, and to how that processor is understanding the instructions specifically for that app, using instruction for application and processes. Okay, so for Mozilla, here, this gives you, the explanation on what that looks like. We have 54 new mails. So Mozilla, if you use Mozilla, you would use Thunderbird. This is free. And in the Windows system, this would be where it's at. It's under username, app data, roaming, Thunderbird profiles. Okay. But you would see mbox file across, whether you're using Windows or other type of platforms, and mbox file pertains to Thunderbird. So in a case where if they're using Chrome, which is the browser, to access the email using Thunderbird, you would also see all of that in here. Okay, see, it tells you the email account, it tells you the protocol, the IMAP protocol. Okay. It also tells you all the related content in that mailbox. And also your browser information. Okay, so here it breaks down, it tells you what an MS file is, which is your mail summary file. And that stores it in, because the way the inbox file is stored, it's stored it in different parts. So the first part is the extension, and then it would contain the index for the mail headers, which is, and so you have the summary and the email headers. We care about those things because it tells us a lot about the user inbox and what's in it, right? What was sent, what kind of system it's used. So if you're using Apple Mail, Opera Mail, and Thunderbird, you're using inbox format. And that's for Mac OS and Linux. Okay. All right. So to answer that question number 13, here is where your profile, and inside the profile, we're able to see our inbox file. And that would give us the account information, the mailbox information, the protocol of that client system that's used for email. Okay. So after this session, we should understand the difference between using different type of client webmail products, right? The type of files that would tie to those, where to go find this, what type of directory you would be able to locate these files, and how to look at the header and what kind of information is contained in the email header for that relates. So the files usually tell us about the email header and what that is. Okay. Okay. So after that, we would talk about gathering or analyzing Webmails artifacts. So if we cannot get more information out of these files from the client system, and also obtaining information from the server or the log files, we should start looking at web browsing history, because they use a web browser to access the webmail. Okay. So that would relate to the sessions and also what the cache images, the text, the component of the web page. So if you want to investigate web-based mail, you also have to evaluate the temporary internet files and the internet cache of that user system. That's important. Okay, so we have to look at the cache file, the page file, right? And looking into possibly cookies, because every site would request for cookies, and with cookies that would tie to their session, their authentication, their access status. So to answer the next question, number 14, it says, what must the investigator do to analyze webmail artifacts? They will have to analyze temporary internet files or internet cache of the user system. And those files would contain images, text, web page component that the user is viewed on the browser, that has viewed on the browser. So whatever the user looked at, we would be able to identify in the temporary internet files. And sometimes those could be deleted. Then we have to go to the unallocated space, conduct a search with that, right?
I have a question. What if a person is surfing the web and they're using like Google Chrome, like incognito? Can you still find those web searches?
Yes, because now incognito just does what? It's concealed that to Google, right? It doesn't allow Google to really see what they're looking at and what kind of things they're looking at, because a lot of the times now all the browser company, what they do is they gather all of the search data and they're trying to give you, right, advertise to your pattern of search. So with that is that your browser, your system is still going to have to store page file when you go through. And now if you disable cookies and things, you just have to, you know, type in password or provide some kind of data so that way the session can continue. Okay. But when you are disabling some of the content doesn't mean that your system doesn't have all of those things temporarily stored. It might not update some of that information to the website provider, and it might not store cookies, but you still have sessions and all of that is stored. We talked about RAM last week, so RAM contains a lot of the details too. Okay. And browser is an application, so it's still going to have to require hard drive and RAM content to run, regardless. Okay, so real quick, here is Devin's answer right now, Gmail. So they use Ajax and XML file for Gmail, right? And it says no longer the image file and text are saved to the local storage device, but Gmail uses Ajax and XML. This new method do not allow the web page to be rebuilt by the investigator, but you can still recover it by looking at RAM or looking at page file, which is on the storage disk. So if you're looking at like a smartphone, you would go to the permanent storage area and you would be able to locate it. And looking at RAM, which is volatile. So that will be a little harder than simply, you know, be able to evaluate the web page or rebuild the web page based on history. But definitely you can still find it. On the Chrome browser, the history is stored with the SQLite is stored here. It's stored under Chrome user data and default. And this is where we could find mailbox information because it's through a browser. So for Chrome browser, you can find history there. I do set up mine to delete when I close out the browser itself, right? But you know, when we say delete from a user standpoint, it doesn't necessarily delete. It just makes that space available again so that data is still retained until it's overwritten. So to analyze Gmail, you should analyze internet cache other resources like RAM and page file on the user's local storage device like hard drive or solid state drive. You can then conduct keyword search for email addresses using, of course, software tool for forensic. And you can specify the keyword search term that would relate to the investigation. So in the lab last week, we did OS forensic. You saw how you can create index and then you can search using the index. So you can index your search and you can also scope down on what you're specifically looking for. Okay, so we can put in email addresses if we know that type of user is logging in. Okay, if we don't, we can start looking at page file and some of this to give us the background picture, and then we can start building little bits and pieces to put together the entire picture. Okay, any question? So I think this chapter is very relevant for all of us because in the field now, this is what you do. You're gonna come across email. One of my acquaintance, he started the forensic team at Kaiser, and he was telling me that the majority of the cases for fraud or any kind of data leak that they dealt with is email based, whether it's webmail or it's corporate mail. So a lot of the times, this is really the core of forensic in corporate or for forensic examiner, because everybody uses email now. You cannot survive without an email. You cannot apply for a job without an email account. It's really difficult to really get around without an email. So you can really tie someone to email access and email information.
Professor Noy, could I say number 13 again? I had to go to the restroom.
Yeah, so you can find that 13 under the Thunderbird section in the notes as well. And I just put down that, yeah, you can get your email account information, the mailbox information, the protocol. We saw that it uses Imap with that. So other questions?
I got a question, but just to hear back from the vouchers.
So I had, just sidetrack real quick. Chris had asked me before if there is any kind of sponsorship for the voucher, as we could not buy the individual vouchers. So the last, as of last Friday, I had said we have to go through foundation. So every college have an organization that helps with money that's coming in, could be from donation or sponsorship. And so I had asked to see if they can look into individual student sponsor, where, like a company, they can pay for your voucher and then you will be sponsored by them. And then we can select the candidates based on performance, completion of certificate, knowledge of that type of certificate. So that was circulated through the dean and it went to the director of the foundation. I'm waiting to hear back. So if I don't hear back within the next couple of days, then I will follow up and let you know. Okay? Because there are clauses everywhere saying that we cannot buy individual student voucher. I also wrote to CompTIA to see if they're willing to package things with institution license. They didn't in the last summer, which is, I talked to them last in July, and they said no for A+, Network Plus, and Security Plus. but that could change now that since it's COVID. So we will see what they say. Okay, I will keep you posted. And then I will let you know. Yes, question?
Yeah, the RCT, is their testing center open for any of their certifications?
So I don't think so. Because you can actually, I don't know about their Cisco and who's in charge of that. You might want to reach out to Mr. Greg and find out if he had a way to schedule something for periodic testing. From what I know is right now the campuses, they're inaccessible for most part, in exception for some cases with the lab. But you can find out specifically. I can't answer for them because they might have something in place. But you know that if you need to certify for Cisco and any other vendor, you can do that remotely now. You can buy the voucher and you can go directly through the company. And as a student, you should access membership and see if you can get discount. But yeah, I would recommend you talk to James Craig or one of the faculty from there. Ask Mr. Barry.
Okay, well, I just know that RCT, like anytime like you're a student, you have access to like tests all the way up through, you know, like Red Hat,
Yeah,
all the different service
yeah, they
certifications right there on campus typically. So
no, they actually don't certify student. They provide exam prep for student. And then yes, you can tie directly to Red Hat to test. And when you test, you still have to buy the voucher through the company. And I know that Red Hat now open up free stuff for students and educator. In the past, they didn't. When I learned Red Hat when I was in college, it was Red Hat 5. So which has no user interface, all terminal. Um, but you know, I don't think any college right now can buy vouchers to test at the bulk level. They might test through some of their service provider, which is either their version of the test, or you know, they would have to supply you with the test by making you pay. I know for sure that with CompTIA, like you have to buy the individual voucher for a specific tester. The only one that they did bulk like that, like you mentioned, would be Cloud Plus. With Cisco, I know for sure that it is individual tester, and then you have to take the ladder test, like CCNA, and then the next level. So, so I would ask carefully about that if it's actually a test or it's a prep test, because I can give you guys practice tests through Practice Lab, which looks like the test and it's not the test. Okay.
yeah, I kind of was on Practice Lab, and I still have access to the practice test for 25 still from
Yeah.
last semester, I believe.
Yeah. So once you have click on that, you would be able to use it. So yeah, I think having that material is useful because that way you can see what you need to brush up on, or in some cases, you know, if you know everything, then you can take the test. Okay, so let's talk about the last few. The default path for Chrome, that would be stored here. That would be your cache information for Chrome. It's under default, under user data. Then the history of the email or the history of the browser access would be here. It's under history provider cache. And it's pretty clear on the differences between the two. So under the default, you would dig further and look into the subfolder with that. Now, if you're using Firefox, Firefox browser history is under profiles and cache 2. And in the cache and history, you can find both of them there. So basically, you can find the stored internet history and the cache for that user profile, right? Assuming that they don't delete that. And if they delete it, then you revert back to page file from the OS and rant, which we covered in the last 2 chapters. So now after all of this, right, the shortcut, the easiest way to obtain really our web email content when we're investigating is through the service provider. So if it's a Gmail, once we have the court order, then we can submit that to Google, right? And then their legal team would talk to their technical side, and then they would provide. Now, there were cases in the past where Yahoo responded back, right? And they said, no, we will not provide this due to privacy of our customer or our client, et cetera, et cetera. And that went all the way to Supreme Court. That was years ago, where they said, no, they don't want to supply. So there's always that area where the tech company can respond back and say that because of privacy and protection, just like how we talk about, you know, in the discussion where you see Cloudflare when they don't want to give up ISIS because that's one of their clients. Okay. So the easiest way is to get a court order and get the service provider to give you the server information, right? In the case where if we want to look at what was really stored on their server, and likely that they will have backup over time. If we cannot rely on that, then we would have to go through individual system, the user system, to pull the data. And because it's a difficult process, which makes this job very demanding. Not everybody can do forensic because it takes patience and it takes knowledge. So if you excel in this, you can go a long way. Okay. I do have a certification for this coming up. So once we have Certiport, you can prepare to test for that. Okay. So if you're curious, if you haven't seen the link, right, it's through EC Console, who does ethical hacking, and they have an associate level for forensic and ethical hacking. Any question? Okay, so that concludes our chapter 8. We don't have any additional homework assignment outside of completing this and the lab this week. So if you do have time, please read the next chapter. Okay. And also, when you receive the survey, please complete my survey. I would appreciate that. It doesn't take very long. It's just a few minutes, short set of questions. Your feedback is important to us, so that way everybody can have a discussion and what I can improve.
And if we have you for both classes, we do both, right?
Yes, if you have me for Python and this, then you do them each separately. You would get 2 separate email. Okay. And if you missed the beginning, I talk about, so in announcement, I posted a couple of things. Active Vision is hiring internship for the summer, and it's going to be ongoing after that. So this is a 12-week internship, and this is out of LA, I think Santa Monica and Woodland Hills. And they have many, so you can check out various ones. And then the second thing I posted earlier today is the Mobile Learn, where you can earn $250 per semester, up to $2,000 if you qualify. And so the qualification is posted there, and the link to apply is posted there. You are all in the CTE program, and you just got to make sure you fulfill these requirements. Okay, you have to be a resident of Moreno Valley because this is funded by City of Moreno Valley. Okay, and I'm available on email if you have any questions or any concern.
Have you heard anything about the apprenticeship?
So yes, Jennifer is wrapping up. I think she still have a few more students to meet. And then I'm working with her to create a Canvas shell where you have to complete a pre-test. Like it's like an A+ test where, you answer like how to find IP address, some troubleshooting questions. And then with your score on that, then you would be able to qualify for interviews and such. I think you met with her already, right, Chris?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, some of you already met with her. So she's making progress in that. So we're targeting for, up soon, even may hopefully by spring at the latest. So let me touch base with her and find out. They already secure employers for that. So once the next stage would be having you talk to employers, like an interview. And then after that, they will tell you when you can start, and you will be paid directly through them.
All right, that's cool.
Okay.
Can we still apply for that? Because I've kind of been torn because of like my current work, but like it's steady now, but I know it's gonna start falling off when the district opens and stuff. So I kind of want to still do that.
Okay. So I had posted the link for that in your announcement.
Yeah, I have the application, everything.
Yeah.
I just need to actually update my resume and send it in.
Yeah, it's just ongoing. So as soon as you get things completed, submitted, she will receive it. That's directly through Jennifer McDaniel, and then she will schedule an appointment to talk to you via Zoom, and then kind of have a feel on where you want to, which direction you want to go, right? Based on your submitted information, and kind of have a feel on how we would match you with specific company. Then we would send out your profile to the company, and then they would select based on that. So hopefully once you complete that, they already met with most of my students. So, and it's only been like about a month since, or even less than a month since they submitted it. So, okay. Questions, other questions? Okay, so have a wonderful night, and I will see you on Wednesday for lab instructions. And I hope that if you have any questions, send me an email. Have a good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Chris.